Hey guys, tonight we're crawling into the muck-soaked, plague-kissed world of medieval peasantry, the land of back-breaking labour, rotting teeth, and dreams that died faster than your average chicken. This is the brutally honest tale of how medieval peasants survived day by day, mostly by not dying. Forget the shiny armour and slow-motion jousts from your favourite fantasy shows. We're heading straight for the pigsty, where survival meant dodging disease, enduring hunger, and hoping your lord didn't need another body for war or ditch digging. So before you tuck yourself in beneath your clean, parasite-free blankets, maybe take a second to thank modern plumbing. And hey, if you enjoy these grimy little trips through time, smash that subscribe button like a peasant smashing lice on their only shirt. Drop your location and the time in the comments. I love knowing which part of the 21st century is tuning in for these medieval miseries. Now, dim your lights, find that perfect position, and prepare yourself. We're about to travel back to a time when the average life expectancy hovered around a sprightly 30 years, when bathing was considered suspicious at best, and when your daily bread might contain more sawdust than actual grain. The year is 1328. The place is somewhere in the muddy expanse of rural Europe, and you, my unfortunate friend, have just been born into the lowest rung of medieval society. Congratulations, you're a peasant. Your life will be brief, brutal, and bewilderingly different from anything you can imagine. So pull your disease-free blankets a little closer, perhaps switch on that fan for some gentle background noise, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're about to discover how medieval peasants survived day by day, and why most of us modern humans wouldn't last until sundown in their world. Congratulations, you've just woken up in your medieval peasant dwelling. The good news is you're alive for another day. The bad news is, well, everything else. Your bed is a lumpy sack stuffed with whatever plant material you could gather last autumn. Straw, hay, dried leaves. Essentially, you're sleeping on what amounts to compost in progress. There's no memory foam, no pillow-top mattress, not even a proper pillow. Instead, your head rests on a small bundle of rags, or perhaps a wooden block if you're feeling particularly masochistic about your neck alignment. The mattress itself sits directly on the packed earth floor, maybe elevated slightly on a crude wooden platform if your family has risen to the dizzying heights of almost not quite poor. This sleeping arrangement comes with complimentary residents, fleas, lice, bedbugs, and the occasional mouse that considers your hair a premium nesting material. Your blanket, and I use that term generously, is a rough woolen cloth that hasn't been washed since the last time it rained hard enough for you to justify the effort. It now weighs approximately twice its original weight due to accumulated sweat, oils, and substances best left unidentified. The wool is so coarse it could exfoliate a rhino, scratching against your skin with every slight movement. The sound that's dragged you from your fitful slumber isn't a gentle smartphone alarm or even a rooster's crow. It's the distant toll of the church bell, the medieval equivalent of get up or starve. Your body, despite being only 23 years old, creaks and groans like a rusted hinge. In the Middle Ages, you're already approaching middle age, and your joints are eager to remind you of this fact. You blink awake in near-total darkness. Windows are a luxury your humble dwelling doesn't possess. Glass is for churches and nobles, not for peasant hovels. The only light filters through the gaps in your thatched roof, creating dusty beams that illuminate the floating particles of, well, everything that you've been breathing all night. As your eyes adjust, you become aware that you're not alone. Privacy in medieval times isn't merely limited, it's non-existent. Your entire family sleeps in this single room, Parents, children, possibly grandparents, maybe a cousin or two who needed somewhere to stay after their own hovel collapsed last winter. On particularly cold nights, you might even share your sleeping space with the family's livestock. Nothing says good morning quite like waking up nose to nose with a goat whose breath smells suspiciously better than your own. The air inside your home is a complex bouquet of aromas. There's the smouldering remains of last night's fire, the unwashed bodies of your family members, the earthy smell of the dirt floor, especially pungent after yesterday's rain seeped in, the distinct aroma of the chamber pot in the corner that no one wanted to empty in the dark, and perhaps a hint of whatever root vegetable has been slowly fermenting in your storage pit. You try to stretch, but immediately regret it as the cold morning air slips under your single-piece linen shift, your night clothes, day clothes, and only clothes all in one convenient garment. The chill of a medieval morning isn't the refreshing coolness of air conditioning. It's a bone-deep cold that seems to have settled into your marrow overnight. Your back aches from the uneven sleeping surface. Your neck is stiff from using your arm as a pillow. There's a suspicious itch behind your ear that suggests the lice are having a particularly good morning. And somewhere in the darkness, a baby, maybe your sibling, maybe your own child, has begun to cry, setting off a chain reaction of groans from the other sleeping forms around you. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where the day starts with discomfort and only promises to get more challenging from there. The rooster hasn't even crowed yet, and already you're experiencing the authentic medieval wake-up call. Pain, cold, and the distinct feeling that hygiene is a concept that won't be invented for several hundred more years. And the truly remarkable thing, this is actually one of the better parts of your day. At least you are lying down. So you've managed to peel yourself off your medieval mattress of misery. Congratulations. Now nature calls, and it's not sending a polite invitation. It's pounding on your bladder's door with the urgency of a tax collector at quarter day. In our modern world, this would be the moment you'd shuffle to your pristine porcelain throne, perhaps scrolling through your phone while seated in climate-controlled comfort. But you're in the 14th century Europe now, where the bathroom experience is less spa retreat and more survival challenge. Let's start with the obvious. There is no bathroom. The concept of a dedicated room for personal waste management is as foreign to medieval peasants as smartphones or dental floss. Instead, you have options, all of them terrible. Option 1, the chamber pot. This earthenware vessel sits ominously in the corner of your one-room dwelling, already containing the nocturnal contributions of family members who didn't fancy a midnight trek outdoors. The smell emanating from this pot could wake the dead, which is convenient since the local cemetery is probably closer than any form of actual plumbing. Using the chamber pot means squatting precariously while maintaining eye contact with whoever else happens to be awake in your crowded home. Privacy isn't just limited, it's mythological. Option 2, the great outdoors. If you're feeling particularly dignified this morning, you might choose to venture behind your hovel to what generously could be called the toilet area. Essentially, the same spot everyone in your family has been using since you moved in. In winter, this means exposing your most vulnerable parts to freezing temperatures. In summer, it means providing a feast for every flying insect within a half-mile radius. Year-round, it means squatting precariously and hoping your balance is better than yesterday when you nearly toppled into your own creation. For the truly fortunate peasants living in larger villages or towns, there might be a communal privy, a wooden structure perched over a pit or, if you're near water, built to deposit waste directly into the local river. Yes, the same river you'll later collect drinking water from. Medieval water purification consisted entirely of the phrase, What you don't know won't hurt you, which incidentally was completely incorrect. Now, for the truly horrifying part, the cleanup. Toilet paper won't be invented for centuries. Instead, you have nature's bounty. Leaves, moss, smooth stones. Or, if you're wealthy enough to own books, you're not. Pages from old manuscripts. Most peasants simply use their left hand followed by a cursory wipe on some grass, which explains why the left hand was considered unclean and why you never ever offered it in greeting. In towns and cities, waste management follows an even simpler principle. The street is the sewer. Chamber pots are emptied from windows with the traditional warning cry of "Gardez-vous," a mangled version of the French garde à l'eau, or watch out for the water. This warning gives pedestrians approximately half a second to leap aside before becoming intimately acquainted with the previous night's digestive outcomes. This system of urban waste disposal creates streets that aren't merely dirty. They're active health hazards flowing with a noxious combination of human waste, animal droppings, food scraps, and mysterious liquids that have evolved their own ecosystems. The smell is so profound that many medieval towns can be detected by nose long before they're visible to the eye. If you're visiting a castle, you might encounter the slightly more sophisticated garderobe, a small closet-like room with a stone or wooden seat positioned over a vertical shaft. This shaft typically empties directly into the moat or onto the ground outside the castle walls. It's medieval plumbing at its finest, which is to say, barely plumbing at all. The garderobe offers a moment of relative privacy, though the drafts coming up from below create a unique cooling sensation that has startled many a noble posterior. The truly ingenious aspect of medieval waste management is how it creates a perfect circular ecosystem of disease. Human waste flows into water sources. Contaminated water is consumed by humans. Humans become ill and produce more waste, continuing the cycle with ruthless efficiency. It's population control through poor sanitation, a system so effective that cities couldn't maintain their populations without constant influx from rural areas. And you've accomplished all this before breakfast. Your day has barely begun, and already you've participated in one of the most dangerous activities of medieval life, attempting to relieve yourself without contracting a fatal illness. Now, with that refreshing experience behind you, it's time to think about the first meal of the day, assuming, of course, that you still have an appetite. You've survived waking up and the perilous morning toilet adventure. Now your stomach growls with a ferocity that would frighten wolves. Time for breakfast, medieval peasant style. First, forget everything you know about breakfast. There are no fluffy pancakes, no avocado toast, no steaming cappuccinos, and definitely no breakfast buffets. The most important meal of your day is about to become the most disappointing. The centerpiece of your morning sustenance is pottage, a word that sounds like porridge, but bears only a passing resemblance to anything you'd willingly consume in the 21st century. Pottage is less a recipe and more a philosophy. Throw whatever edible items you have into a pot, add water, and boil until it becomes a substance that won't immediately kill you. Your family's cooking pot hangs perpetually over the central hearth. It's never truly emptied or cleaned, merely topped up with new ingredients as needed. This means today's breakfast contains elements of last night's dinner, possibly some of yesterday's breakfast, and if you're particularly unlucky, mysterious contributions from several days ago that have developed their own unique flavors through the miracle of fermentation. The base of your pottage is typically a grain, oats if you're in Northern Europe, barley or rye further south. These aren't the steel-cut, organic, gluten-free oats of modern health food stores. These are rough, often partially spoiled grains that have been ground using stones that also ground bits of the stones themselves into your food. Every bite contains a delightful surprise crunch that might be an uncooked grain or might be something that will crack your tooth. Breakfast becomes a game of dental roulette. Into this grain base goes whatever vegetables your family has managed to keep through winter. Dried peas, beans, turnips, perhaps some onions if you're fortunate. In spring and summer, you might add foraged greens, dandelion leaves, nettles, or whatever hasn't been eaten by local wildlife. Meat is a rare luxury, though you might find small bits of salt pork or bacon fat added for flavour on special occasions. More commonly, your pottage is seasoned with nothing but salt, if your family can afford it. The resulting concoction resembles cement more than food, a thick greyish-brown sludge that sits in your wooden bowl like an edible punishment. The smell is a complex bouquet of overcooked vegetables with notes of smoke and a hint of whatever's been fermenting in the bottom of the pot for the past week. To accompany this gourmet slop, you have bread. But this isn't the light, fluffy sourdough of artisanal bakeries. Medieval peasant bread is a dense, dark affair made from rye or barley, grains less desirable but more affordable than wheat, which is reserved for the tables of the wealthy. Your bread often contains fillers to make expensive flour go further: ground peas, acorns, beans, or in desperate times, ground straw or sawdust. The resulting loaf is so dense it could serve as a weapon in a pinch. The crust is hard enough to challenge even healthy teeth, which you, as a medieval peasant, certainly don't possess. The interior is coarse and heavy, with a sourness that comes not from carefully cultivated sourdough starters, but from flour that's begun to turn before baking. On the bright side, the mould that frequently grows on this bread contains penicillin, making your daily sustenance a form of preventative medicine, though no one will discover this fact for another 600 years. What about drinks? Surely you can wash down this culinary catastrophe with something refreshing. Indeed you can, if you consider ale refreshing at 6 in the morning. Water is available, but drinking it is a gamble with death, given that the same streams and wells that provide drinking water also serve as medieval sewage systems. Instead, most peasants start their day with small beer, or ale, a low-alcohol brew that's been through enough fermentation to kill most deadly bacteria. This morning, ale isn't the craft IPA of modern brewpubs. It's cloudy, room temperature, and has about as much complexity as the feudal tax system. Children drink it too. The alcohol content is low enough that it won't immediately intoxicate them, and the alternative might be deadly dysentery. It's not so much a beverage choice as a survival strategy. If you're exceptionally wealthy for a peasant, you might sweeten your pottage with a precious spoonful of honey. If you're of average means, you'll make do with the natural sweetness of whatever vegetables haven't yet rotted in your storage pit. And if you're poor even by medieval peasant standards, you might simply chew on a crust of bread softened in water and call it a feast. The entire meal is consumed in near silence, sitting on rough wooden benches or stools around the central fire. There's no table setting, no matching dinnerware, just wooden bowls and spoons that have been passed down through generations, each carrying the teeth marks of your ancestors. If you're lucky, you have your own spoon. If not, you wait your turn to use the family utensil. And that's breakfast. A meal so uninspiring that it makes modern instant oatmeal look like a Michelin-starred experience. You've consumed enough calories to begin your day of back-breaking labour, ingested enough bacteria to challenge your medieval immune system, and possibly introduced several new parasites to your digestive tract. The remarkable thing is that this might be the best meal of your day. As the sun climbs higher and your work grows more demanding, lunch will be even simpler. Perhaps just a piece of that same dense bread, and maybe, if the harvest was good, an onion or a turnip eaten raw in the field. So savour your morning pottage, peasant. It's all downhill from here. Part 3.5. Mealtime Misery. The later day feast. You've somehow survived the morning and half the day on your meagre breakfast. Now, as the sun reaches its highest point, your stomach growls with the ferocity of a starving wolf. Time for the midday meal, another opportunity for medieval cuisine to disappoint you in new and creative ways. Lunch, as we know it today, doesn't really exist in medieval peasant life. There's no designated lunch hour, no sandwich shops, and definitely no meal prep containers neatly stacked in a refrigerator. Instead, you might get a brief respite from labour to consume what can only generously be called a meal. For field workers, this midday sustenance is typically consumed right where you're working. No one's trudging back to the village just to eat. That would waste precious daylight and energy. Instead, you've brought your provisions with you. A hunk of that same dense bread from breakfast, perhaps an onion or turnip, maybe a small container of ale or small beer to wash it down. You sit in whatever shade you can find, if there is any, your back aching from hours of labour, sweat dripping from your brow, and unwrap your food from a scrap of cloth. The bread has somehow managed to become even harder since morning. Biting into it requires all the strength your jaw can muster, and the risk of cracking a tooth is very real. But you persist because calories are calories and you need them desperately. The vegetable, let's say it's an onion today, is eaten raw like an apple. There's no slicing or dicing, no salad dressing, just crunching into it with what remains of your teeth. The sharp, pungent flavour makes your eyes water, but it adds much needed moisture to the dry bread. Your breath afterward could fell a night at 20 paces, but since everyone else is eating similarly aromatic foods, no one notices or cares. If you're exceptionally fortunate, you might have a small piece of cheese. This isn't the carefully aged, artisanal cheese of modern farmers' markets. Medieval peasant cheese is a crude affair, made from whatever milk could be spared from more essential uses. It's hard, salty, and often riddled with mould, though the mould is simply eaten along with the rest. Waste not, want not. The entire meal is consumed in perhaps 15 minutes. There's no leisurely lunch break, no scrolling through social media between bites. You eat quickly, efficiently, and return to work because the sun waits for no one, and neither does your lord. Back at the village, women might pause their work for a similarly sparse meal, though they're more likely to have access to whatever's simmering in the perpetual cooking pot. Children grab food opportunistically throughout the day, a crust of bread here, a turnip there, learning early that regular mealtimes are a luxury their social station doesn't afford. As evening approaches and the day's labour finally winds down, thoughts turn to the main meal of the day, supper. This is as close as medieval peasants get to a proper sit-down family dinner, though it bears little resemblance to our modern conception of the evening meal. The family gathers around the central hearth as the day's pottage, which has been simmering since morning, reaches its final form. The consistency has thickened as water evaporated throughout the day, and perhaps new ingredients were added as people came and went. The resulting stew is ladled into wooden bowls, the largest portion going to the hardest working adult male, with decreasing amounts based on one's position in the family hierarchy. On ordinary days, this evening pottage is much like the morning version, grain-based, vegetable-heavy, and meat-free. But perhaps today is special, a Sunday or minor feast day, which means a rare treat might be added to the pot. A bit of salt pork, a few scraps of bacon, Or, if truly fortunate, a piece of actual meat might find its way into the family cauldron. This addition transforms the bland pottage into something approaching flavorful, though still nothing you'd recognize as cuisine. The meat is often tough, stringy, and used more as a flavoring than a main component. It might be a piece that's been preserved through smoking or salting, making it intensely salty and requiring long cooking to become remotely chewable. Accompanying the pottage is, predictably, more bread. The same dense, coarse loaf that's been your companion all day continues its service into the evening. By now, it's likely gone stale, making it even more challenging for your already overtaxed teeth. Some peasants might soak particularly stubborn pieces in the pottage to soften them. Medieval bread pudding, if you will, though considerably less sweet and infinitely less appetizing. Vegetables make another appearance, this time cooked into submission in the pottage. Whatever was available seasonally or could be stored through winter: cabbage, onions, leeks, garlic, turnips, parsnips, or if you're lucky, peas or beans for some much-needed protein. The cooking process has leached most of the colour from them, turning everything into various shades of brown and grey. Visually appealing, it is not. Spices are virtually non-existent in peasant cooking. Salt is used sparingly due to its cost. Pepper is a luxury reserved for the wealthy. The most exotic flavouring in your pottage might be a handful of herbs grown in a small garden patch: parsley, sage, thyme, or whatever local plants have culinary or medicinal properties. These add subtle notes to the otherwise bland dish, though nothing approaching the complex flavour profiles we expect in modern cooking. The meal is eaten in near silence, not from any sense of formality, but from sheer exhaustion. After a day of physical labour that would send modern gym enthusiasts crying to their personal trainers, conversation requires energy you simply don't have to spare. Instead, you focus on the mechanical process of eating, replenishing the calories burned throughout the day and preparing your body for the work that awaits tomorrow. Utensils are minimal. You might have a wooden spoon for the pottage, but fingers serve for most other foods. Table manners consist primarily of not taking more than your fair share, and perhaps not chewing with your mouth completely open. There are no napkins. Your sleeve serves this purpose when absolutely necessary. Drinks with supper follow the same pattern as breakfast: ale or small beer for adults, watered-down versions for children. Water itself remains suspect unless from a known clean source like a spring. The alcohol content in these beverages is low enough that intoxication isn't a concern, though after a day of grueling labour, even mild alcoholic effects might provide welcome relief from physical discomfort. Dessert, as a separate sweet course, doesn't exist in the peasant diet. The closest thing might be a piece of fruit in season, or perhaps some nuts gathered from the forest. Honey is far too valuable to use frivolously, though on very special occasions, a wedding or major feast day, a honey-sweetened treat might appear. More commonly, the meal simply ends when the food is gone, with no ceremonial conclusion. After supper comes the brief window of time before sleep claims you. This might be when families engage in what limited social interaction their energy allows. Stories might be told, especially in winter when darkness falls early and outdoor work ceases. Simple crafts like whittling or mending might occupy hands while minds begin to slow from the day's exertions. But make no mistake, this isn't leisure time as we understand it. These evening activities are still productive, still necessary for survival. The medieval peasant's relationship with food never includes the concept of eating for pleasure. Food is fuel, sustenance, survival, nothing more, nothing less. As you scrape the last bits of pottage from your bowl with a crust of bread, you're not satisfied in the modern sense. You're not full. You're merely no longer actively hungry. The gnawing emptiness has retreated temporarily, though it never disappears completely. Chronic mild undernourishment is your baseline state, with periods of actual hunger during the hungry gap of late winter and early spring. And tomorrow. Tomorrow brings the same culinary cycle, with variations only as the seasons and available ingredients change. The medieval peasant diet is a masterclass in monotony, broken only by feast days that punctuate the year with brief moments of relative abundance. So savour that last spoonful of greyish-brown pottage, peasant. In your world, this counts as a good meal, and in the grand scheme of medieval existence, having enough food to quiet your stomach until morning is a victory worth acknowledging. Part 4. Dressing for distress. Now that you've filled your stomach with something vaguely nutritious, it's time to get dressed for the day. And by get dressed, I mean put on the exact same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before that, and possibly every day since last Michaelmas. Your medieval wardrobe is the definition of minimalist, though not by choice. Most peasants own exactly one outfit, perhaps two if you're particularly prosperous. The concept of fashion exists only for nobles and wealthy merchants. For you, clothing serves the basic functions of covering your body and providing some meagre protection from the elements. Style points are neither awarded nor expected. Let's start with your undergarments, assuming you're fortunate enough to have any. For men, this might be a linen shirt called a chemise that hangs to about mid-thigh. For women, it's a similar linen shift that reaches to the ankles. This undergarment is the closest thing to pajamas in your world, which is why you likely slept in it. It's also the closest thing to underwear, which means it serves triple duty as sleepwear, underwear, and the base layer of your daily outfit. This linen shift hasn't been washed in, well, you can't actually remember the last time. Washing clothes requires hauling water, heating it over a fire, using precious soap, if you have any, and then waiting for items to dry, a process that could take days in the damp European climate. Most peasants wash their single outfit once or twice a year, usually during summer when they can bathe in a river and wash their clothes simultaneously. The result? Your undergarment has developed a colour and texture entirely its own. What started as off-white linen has evolved into a mottled tapestry of sweat stains, food spills, dirt, and other substances best left unidentified. It's stiff in some places, suspiciously soft in others, and emits an aroma that would clear a modern subway car in seconds. Over this multifunctional undergarment, men don woolen breeches, loose-fitting trousers that tie at the waist and knee, and a tunic that reaches to mid-thigh. Women wear a kirtle, a simple dress with fitted bodice and long skirt, often layered with an apron to protect the precious fabric from the worst of the day's dirt and grime. The fabric of these outer garments deserves special mention. This isn't the soft, processed wool of modern clothing. Medieval wool is coarse, scratchy, and water-resistant, thanks to the natural lanolin oils. It's perfect for repelling rain and snow, but feels like wearing a combination of burlap and sandpaper against your skin. Every movement creates friction, every step a reminder that comfort is a concept that won't be invented for several more centuries. The colour of your clothing is as limited as your menu. Bright dyes are expensive and reserved for the wealthy. As a peasant, your wardrobe comes in an exciting range of browns, greys, and muddy greens, colours that conveniently hide the worst of the stains and dirt. Any pattern or decoration is limited to simple embroidery around cuffs or necklines, if you're lucky enough to have a family member with both the skill and the rare free time to add such luxuries. Now for footwear, assuming you have any. Many peasants go barefoot for much of the year, developing calluses thick enough to walk on gravel without flinching. If you do have shoes, they're likely simple leather affairs with wooden soles, or perhaps just leather wrapped and tied around your feet and ankles. These shoes aren't sized specifically for you. They're roughly shaped to be foot-like, and you make do with whatever's available. Your medieval shoes have all the arch support of a paper towel and the water resistance of a sieve. In wet weather, which is most weather in medieval Europe, your feet are perpetually damp. In winter, they're cold and damp. In summer, they're hot and damp. The constant moisture creates the perfect environment for fungal infections, adding an interesting dimension of itching and discomfort to your daily experience. Accessories are minimal but functional. A belt or cord around your waist holds up your breeches or gathers your kirtle, and provides a place to hang a small knife, your most important tool for eating, working, and defense. A hood or cap might protect your head from sun or rain, and in winter you might wrap yourself in a cloak, essentially a blanket with pretensions of being outerwear. The process of getting dressed takes mere moments because medieval clothing lacks the complexity of buttons, zippers, or elastic. Everything is tied, pinned, or simply draped in place. This simplicity is the one advantage of your medieval wardrobe. You'll never be late for work because you couldn't find matching socks. Once dressed, you're ready to face the day in an outfit that itches, smells, and provides minimal protection from the elements. Your clothes are home to a thriving ecosystem of fleas, lice, and other parasites that consider your body heat and occasional food spills to be the perfect habitat. Throughout the day, you'll absent-mindedly scratch at these unwelcome roommates, a habit so common that no one even notices or comments on it. The truly remarkable thing about medieval clothing is its durability. Your single outfit must last for years, patched and repaired until the original fabric is barely visible beneath the layers of mending. When a garment finally becomes unwearable, it isn't discarded but repurposed, cut down into children's clothing, used as patches for other items, or in its final stage, reduced to rags for cleaning or bandages. So there you stand, dressed in your medieval finest, an outfit that would horrify modern health inspectors and fashion consultants in equal measure. But you're not concerned with style. You're dressed for survival in a world where the elements, your work, and the general filth of medieval life conspire to make every day a challenge. And the most remarkable thing? By medieval standards, you look completely normal. Everyone around you is equally itchy, smelly, and infested. In the 14th century, this isn't a fashion disaster, it's just Tuesday morning. Now that you're dressed in your medieval finest, let's talk about that morning smile. Or rather, let's talk about why smiling in medieval Europe was a risky proposition at best. In our modern world, dental care is a twice-daily ritual involving fluoride toothpaste, minty fresh mouthwash, and floss that somehow always manages to judge us. We visit dentists for regular cleanings, straighten our teeth with braces, and whiten them to match our favourite celebrity's dazzling grin. In medieval Europe, dental care is, well, care isn't exactly the right word. Dental neglect, or perhaps dental fatalism, would be more accurate. Let's start with the basics. There are no toothbrushes, as you know them. No toothpaste, no dental floss, no mouthwash unless you count ale, which some optimistic peasants might. The concept of oral hygiene exists in the vaguest sense, but the tools and knowledge to effectively practice it are centuries away. Some of the more fastidious medieval folk might rub their teeth with a rough cloth, perhaps dipped in salt if they can afford such luxury. Others might chew on certain herbs or twigs from trees like hazel or birch, which contain natural compounds that can temporarily freshen breath. But for most peasants, dental care consists entirely of wait until it hurts too much, then have it pulled. The medieval diet does your teeth no favours either. That coarse bread you had for breakfast? It's ground on stone mills that inevitably mix tiny rock particles into the flour. Every bite is essentially a micro sandblasting for your tooth enamel. The honey occasionally used to sweeten food, pure sugar for the bacteria in your mouth. Those tough, fibrous vegetables that make up most of your diet, they require vigorous chewing, wearing down your teeth like sandpaper on wood. By age 25, your teeth have already begun their enthusiastic migration toward various shades of yellow, brown, and black. Cavities aren't just common, they're expected. Gum disease isn't a condition, it's a way of life. Your breath could wilt flowers at 20 paces, but fortunately, everyone else's breath is equally potent, creating a kind of olfactory stalemate when conversing. Toothaches are so common, they're practically a medieval fashion accessory. The pain ranges from a dull, persistent throb to the kind of white-hot agony that makes beheading seem like a reasonable alternative. Folk remedies abound, holding alcohol in your mouth, applying hot compresses, placing various herbs on the affected tooth, or my personal favourite, driving out the toothworm. Yes, medieval people believed that dental pain was caused by tiny worms that burrowed into teeth and gnawed at the nerves. The treatment? Sometimes it involved holding your face over a bowl of hot water with herbs, believing the steam would draw out the worms. Other times, it meant placing honey on the painful tooth, then waiting beside a fire with your mouth open, holding tiny wooden sticks. When the worms, actually the nerve fibres from your dying tooth pulp, crawled out toward the honey, you were supposed to spear them with the sticks. If home remedies fail, there's always the local barber surgeon, the same person who cuts your hair and might occasionally bleed you to balance your humours. Their dental toolkit consists primarily of pliers designed for woodworking or metal smithing, repurposed for the delicate task of yanking teeth from living human mouths. There's no anaesthesia beyond perhaps a swig of strong alcohol or a swift punch to the jaw if you're lucky. The extraction process is less medical procedure and more tug-of-war where your skull is the rope. Infections following these extractions are common, sometimes fatal. But hey, at least the toothache stops. Either because the tooth is gone or because you are. For the wealthy, there are slightly more sophisticated options. False teeth carved from animal bone or human teeth sourced from the poor or from battlefields can be wired into place where natural teeth once stood. These replacement teeth are functional in the loosest sense of the word. They might allow for slightly better chewing but do nothing for appearance and tend to rot even faster than natural teeth. The social implications of poor dental health are minimal simply because everyone suffers equally. Bad teeth aren't stigmatized when they're universal. In fact, having all your teeth into old age might mark you as suspiciously different, possibly in league with dark forces. Medieval beauty standards didn't include a Hollywood smile. By the time you reach your 30s, if you're fortunate enough to live that long, your dental situation resembles a neglected graveyard, a few survivors standing crooked among the fallen, all of them discoloured and in various states of decay. Chewing becomes a strategic exercise, using whatever functional teeth remain to process food before swallowing. The truly remarkable thing about medieval dental health is not how bad it was, but how people simply accepted it as an inevitable part of life. Tooth pain wasn't a medical emergency. It was Tuesday and Wednesday and every other day until the tooth finally gave up or was forcibly removed. So as you prepare to head out for your day of labor, you might run your tongue over your teeth and feel the familiar, rough texture, the sensitive spots, perhaps the sharp edge of a broken molar. But you won't reach for a toothbrush, won't swish with mouthwash, won't worry about your next dental appointment. In medieval Europe, your smile is just another part of your body slowly failing you, one tooth at a time. And compared to all the other ways medieval life threatens your existence, a few rotting teeth hardly seem worth mentioning. With your stomach half filled with questionable pottage, your body wrapped in itchy wool, and your mouth already aching, it's time for the main event of medieval peasant life: work. And not the kind of work where you sit in an ergonomic chair complaining about spreadsheets. This is the bend your back, callous your hands, sweat until you drop kind of labour that would make modern gym enthusiasts weep into their protein shakes. Your workday doesn't start at 9 a.m. after a leisurely commute. It begins at dawn, the moment there's enough light to see without impaling yourself on farm equipment. In summer, this might mean starting as early as 4 a.m. In winter, you get the luxury of sleeping in until perhaps 7 a.m., only to work until darkness forces you to stop. The concept of weekends doesn't exist. You'll work 6 days a week, with Sunday reserved for church and essential chores that couldn't be completed during the week. Holidays offer occasional respite. The medieval calendar had about 50 feast days when work was discouraged, but even these often involved community labour like repairing roads or church buildings. What exactly is your job? For about 90% of medieval peasants, the answer is simple: farming. You're an agricultural labourer, either working your own small plot of land or, more likely, toiling on the fields belonging to your lord. The feudal system ensures that a significant portion of your labour directly benefits the nobility, who generously allow you to not starve in return. Your farming tools would make modern agriculturalists laugh, then cry, then develop immediate back pain just from looking at them. There are no tractors, no irrigation systems, no chemical fertilizers. Your technology consists primarily of items you could make yourself from wood and a bit of iron. Wooden ploughs, perhaps with an iron tip if you're fortunate, scythes, sickles, hoes, rakes, and flails. Ploughing is done with the help of oxen if your village is prosperous, or by human power if it's not. Either way, it involves walking mile after mile behind a plough, forcing it through soil that seems determined to resist your efforts. The plough itself is heavy, awkward, and about as sophisticated as a pointed stick. Each furrow requires physical strength and endurance that would qualify as an extreme sport in modern times. Planting is done by hand, scattering seeds with a technique called broadcasting that's exactly as precise as it sounds. You walk the fields with a bag of precious seed, throwing handfuls in what you hope is an even distribution. Birds follow behind you, gratefully accepting your unintentional donation to their diet. The amount of seed that actually grows into crops is surprisingly small, making each harvest a minor miracle. Weeding is a constant battle fought on hands and knees, pulling unwanted plants that threaten to choke your crops. There are no herbicides, no weed barriers, just your fingers and perhaps a small tool to dig out particularly stubborn roots. Your back aches, your knees develop calluses, and the weeds seem to multiply overnight. Harvesting brings the most intense labour of all. Armed with a sickle or scythe, you cut grain by hand, one swing at a time, bent over for hours under the summer sun. Each movement must be precise. Cut too high, and you waste precious straw used for everything from bedding to roof thatching. Cut too low, and you dull your blade on stones and dirt. After cutting comes binding, gathering the grain into sheaves tied with twisted straw, then stacking, threshing, separating grain from stalks by beating it with flails, winnowing, tossing grain into the air so wind blows away the chaff, and finally grinding. Each step is manual, each step essential, each step exhausting. The work isn't just physically demanding, it's relentless. There's no calling in sick when you're a medieval peasant. Unless you're literally unable to stand, you work. Fever, work through it. Injured hand, use the other one. Feeling a bit under the weather? That's nice. The fields don't care. If you're a woman, congratulations. You get to do all of the above, plus maintain the household. While men might focus primarily on field work, women juggle agricultural labour with cooking, cleaning, childcare, cloth making, and food preservation. Medieval multitasking isn't checking email while on a conference call. It's nursing a baby while stirring a pot of pottage with one hand and spinning wool with the other. Speaking of cloth making, this deserves special mention as one of the most time-consuming aspects of medieval life. The process of turning raw wool or flax into usable fabric involves carding, spinning, weaving, and finishing, each step requiring specialized tools and considerable skill. A single shirt might represent weeks of labor, which explains why clothing was so valuable and so rarely replaced. Children aren't exempt from labor either. By age 5 or 6, kids are already contributing to family work, starting with simple tasks like gathering eggs or scaring birds from fields, gradually taking on more responsibility as they grow. Childhood isn't a protected time of play and education, it's an apprenticeship in survival. The seasonal nature of farming means your work changes throughout the year, but it never stops. Spring brings ploughing and planting. Summer is for weeding and maintaining. Fall means harvest, the most critical and labor-intensive time. Winter involves repairs, indoor work like threshing grain, and caring for livestock. Speaking of livestock, your animals require constant attention. Cows need milking twice daily, every day without exception. Sheep need protection from predators. Chickens need to be kept from becoming fox food. Pigs need to be driven to woodlands for foraging. Each animal represents both a valuable resource and another mouth demanding your time and energy. The most remarkable aspect of medieval labour isn't just its physical intensity, but its purpose. You're not working to get ahead, earn a promotion, or save for retirement. You're working to survive until next season. A poor harvest doesn't mean reduced profits, it means potential starvation for your family and community. And through it all, a significant portion of what you produce isn't even yours to keep. The feudal system demands payment in the form of labour on the lord's land, a share of your crops, and various other obligations. The church takes another cut in the form of tithes, theoretically 10% of your production. Between lord and church, you might surrender 30 to 50% of everything you produce. So, as the sun climbs higher in the sky, you continue your labour. Your back aches, your hands blister then callous, your skin burns then tans to leather. You work with the grim determination of someone who knows that stopping isn't an option. There are no sick days, no vacation time, no retirement plan. This is your life, peasant. From dawn to dusk, from spring to winter, from childhood until your body finally gives out. The work never ends. It just waits for the next generation to continue the eternal struggle against hunger, against the elements, against the unforgiving reality of medieval existence. Let's talk about the weather. Not the polite, small talk kind of weather discussion we have today, but the medieval, will this kill me? Variety of meteorological concern. In our modern world, weather is something we observe through apps and windows. We dash from climate-controlled homes to climate-controlled cars to climate-controlled offices. A rainy day might mean a slightly damp commute, or a cancelled picnic. In medieval Europe, weather wasn't an inconvenience. It was an existential threat. Let's start with winter, that special season when your hovel transforms from merely uncomfortable to actively dangerous. Medieval winters weren't necessarily colder than modern ones, though the little ice age that began in the late Middle Ages certainly brought some brutal ones. But the experience of cold was dramatically different. Your home, as we've established, is essentially a wooden frame with walls made of sticks and mud. Insulation. That's a concept that won't be invented for centuries. The gaps between wall materials create a delightful cross-ventilation effect, ensuring that whatever temperature exists outside is quickly shared with your indoor environment, minus perhaps 5 degrees if you're lucky. The only heat source is your central hearth, an open fire that sends most of its warmth straight up through the hole in your roof, rather than radiating it throughout your dwelling. The area immediately around the fire might reach a tolerable temperature, creating a roughly 3-foot radius of not quite freezing conditions. Beyond that, the temperature drops precipitously, which explains why medieval families huddled together so closely. Bedtime in winter is a special form of torture. Your bed, already uncomfortable by modern standards, becomes a cold, damp nest that absorbs the chill from the air. The initial shock of climbing into this frigid cocoon is enough to take your breath away. The only way to generate warmth is through body heat, yours and your family members, which is why sleeping alone was considered a hardship rather than a luxury. Your clothing offers minimal protection against winter's bite. Layering is your primary strategy, wearing every garment you own simultaneously. Wool is the most common material, and while it retains some warmth when damp, a frequent condition in medieval Europe, it's still far from adequate against truly cold temperatures. Feet and hands suffer the most, with chilblains, painful inflammation caused by poor circulation in cold, becoming a common winter companion. Snow transforms your world in ways both beautiful and deadly. The pristine white blanket might look picturesque, but it turns paths into treacherous slides, isolates villages, and makes travel nearly impossible. A heavy snowfall could cut off supply routes, prevent access to wells, and trap livestock. What might be a snow day of fun in modern times could mean starvation in the medieval world. Ice brings its own special dangers. Slips and falls on icy surfaces lead to broken bones, potentially fatal injuries in a world without modern medical care. Frozen water sources mean hours spent melting snow or breaking through ice for drinking water, and the freeze-thaw cycle wreaks havoc on your home's structure, cracking the daub in your walls and creating new drafts just when you need them least. But winter's greatest threat isn't the cold itself, it's the scarcity it brings. Food stores dwindle as the season progresses. Hunting becomes more difficult. Gathering is nearly impossible. By February, many peasant families face the genuine prospect of starvation, carefully rationing what little remains, and sometimes resorting to foods they would normally reject. Bark bread, made by mixing flour with ground tree bark, boiled leather, or even the seed grain meant for spring planting, a desperate measure that mortgages the future for immediate survival. Then comes spring, bringing with it a whole new set of meteorological challenges. The thaw turns the world into a muddy morass. Paths become nearly impassable quagmires. Fields are too wet to plough. Your home, which has absorbed moisture all winter, now begins to release it as temperatures rise, creating an indoor environment with the approximate humidity of a tropical rainforest. Spring rains are both blessing and curse. They're essential for crops, but can quickly become destructive. Without modern flood control, rivers regularly burst their banks, destroying homes, drowning livestock, and washing away the seeds so carefully planted in newly tilled fields. A particularly wet spring could doom a community to hunger months later when harvest time arrives. The hungry gap of late winter and early spring represents the most dangerous time in the medieval calendar. Winter stores are depleted, new crops aren't yet ready, and the weather remains unpredictable enough to threaten what little food production is possible. Your body, already weakened by months of cold and inadequate nutrition, becomes more susceptible to disease just as activity levels must increase for spring planting. Summer arrives with its own meteorological torments. Your thatched roof dwelling, so ineffective at retaining heat in winter, now excels at trapping it. The single room becomes an oven, especially with the cooking fire still necessary for food preparation. The concept of too hot to sleep takes on new meaning when your bed is a sweat-soaked pile of straw in an airless room shared with multiple family members. Drought represents summer's greatest threat. Without irrigation systems, crops depend entirely on rainfall. A few weeks without rain could wither the plants that represent your entire food supply for the coming year. You watch the sky with increasing desperation, perhaps participating in church processions or folk rituals meant to bring rain. When clouds finally appear, the relief is palpable unless they bring something worse. Summer storms in medieval Europe weren't just inconveniences, they were potential catastrophes. Lightning could ignite your thatched roof, turning your home to ash in minutes. Hail could destroy an entire grain crop in the time it takes to say a desperate prayer. Strong winds could flatten fields of nearly ripe wheat, making harvest difficult or impossible. Each dark cloud on the horizon brings both hope for gentle rain and fear of destruction. The heat brings its own health hazards. Without clean water sources, dehydration becomes a serious risk during summer fieldwork. Foodborne illnesses increase as meat and dairy spoil quickly. Insects multiply exponentially, bringing disease and tormenting both humans and livestock. The concept of heat stroke isn't medically understood, but the phenomenon certainly exists, sometimes claiming lives during particularly intense labour in hot weather. Autumn weather brings the final challenge of the agricultural year: timing. The harvest represents the culmination of an entire year's work, and its success depends entirely on having dry weather during the critical weeks when grain must be cut, dried, and stored. An ill-timed rainstorm can cause grain to sprout in the fields or hay to rot before proper drying. Early frosts can destroy crops still maturing. The medieval farmer becomes an amateur meteorologist out of necessity, reading clouds, wind directions, and animal behaviours for clues about coming weather. These folk methods of prediction, passed down through generations, are surprisingly effective for short-term forecasting, though utterly inadequate for predicting the longer-term patterns that might mean the difference between abundance and famine. Throughout all seasons, the medieval peasant's relationship with weather is intimate and fraught. There are no weather apps, no satellite forecasts, no early warning systems for severe storms. You experience weather directly, physically, sometimes painfully. It dictates your activities, threatens your home, destroys your work, and occasionally takes your life. Perhaps most striking to modern sensibilities is the medieval acceptance of weather as something beyond human control. Where we might rage against an inconvenient storm or unexpected freeze, the medieval peasant accepts these as part of the natural or divine order. Weather isn't good or bad, it simply is, another aspect of a world that must be endured rather than controlled. So as you shiver through winter nights or sweat through summer days, Remember that your medieval existence isn't just about surviving each weather event, it's about adapting to a climate that shows no mercy and offers no apologies. The weather, like so much else in medieval life, isn't something that happens to you occasionally. It's something you live within constantly, another omnipresent challenge in a world already overflowing with them. Part 7. Home Sweet Hovel. After a long day of backbreaking labour, you finally return to your home, though home might be giving your dwelling more credit than it deserves. Welcome to your medieval house, a structure that makes modern garden sheds look like luxury penthouses. The typical peasant dwelling is what historians politely call a longhouse, and what modern building inspectors would call a catastrophic violation of every known safety code. It's essentially a single-room structure, roughly rectangular, with walls made of wattle and daub, a fancy way of saying sticks smeared with mud. If you're particularly affluent, you might have a stone foundation. If you're not, your walls rise directly from the dirt, inviting every manner of creature to tunnel their way into your living space. The roof is thatched with straw, reeds, or whatever plant material is locally abundant. While picturesque from a distance, thatch is essentially an invitation for every rodent, bird, and insect in the vicinity to take up residence above your head. It's not a question of if your roof contains mice, but how many generations of them have established their family dynasty up there. Thatch needs to be replaced every few years as it rots, leaks, and becomes increasingly populated with unwanted tenants. The old thatch, now composted with years of smoke, soot, and animal droppings, is often recycled as fertilizer for your garden. Waste not, want not in the medieval economy. Your floor is packed earth, literally just dirt that's been trampled flat by generations of feet. In wet weather, which is most weather in medieval Europe, this dirt floor becomes damp and sometimes muddy. In particularly prosperous households, the floor might be strewn with rushes or straw to absorb moisture and provide minimal insulation. These floor coverings are rarely changed, creating a festering layer of dropped food, animal droppings, and unidentifiable substances that would make modern health inspectors faint on the spot. Windows? Those are for people who don't mind being cold or robbed. Glass is prohibitively expensive and reserved for churches and noble houses. Your dwelling might have one or two small openings covered with wooden shutters, oiled parchment, or simply cloth. These openings provide minimal light and can be closed against bad weather, which means your home's interior exists in a perpetual twilight broken only by firelight. Speaking of fire, the hearth is the literal and figurative heart of your home. It's an open fire pit in the centre of your single room, with smoke theoretically escaping through a hole in the roof. In practice, your home is constantly filled with a smoky haze that stings your eyes, blackens your lungs, and eventually turns the interior of your roof into a sooty, creosote-coated fire hazard. This central fire serves multiple purposes: cooking, heating, light, and occasionally accidental entertainment when sparks ignite your floor rushes. There's no chimney, no fireplace, just open flame with all the safety features of a medieval torture device, which is to say, none at all. Furniture in your peasant palace is minimal and crude. You might have a table and benches, though these are often just rough planks laid across trestles that can be taken down when not in use. Storage consists of wooden chests or pottery vessels. Your bed, as we've discussed, is less a piece of furniture and more a designated spot on the floor where your straw-stuffed mattress resides. The most sophisticated item in your home might be a loom for weaving cloth, a spinning wheel, or perhaps a butter churn. Tools essential for producing goods your family needs to survive. These aren't decorative items or status symbols. They're the medieval equivalent of critical infrastructure. Privacy doesn't exist in your one-room dwelling. Every family activity happens in full view of everyone else. Sleeping, dressing, arguing, making up, making more peasants, all within a space roughly the size of a modern living room. Family planning in medieval times consists mainly of turning your back and hoping the children are asleep. Your home is also a multi-species dwelling. In addition to the human occupants, you likely share your living space with chickens, perhaps a pig, and definitely a comprehensive ecosystem of rats, mice, and insects. In colder regions or harsh winters, larger livestock might join you indoors. Nothing says cozy quite like sharing your sleeping space with a cow, though the extra body heat is a genuine benefit when frost forms on the inside of your walls. The aroma of your home is a complex bouquet that would challenge even the most poetic sommelier. Bass notes of wood smoke and unwashed bodies blend with the earthy scent of the dirt floor. Middle notes include whatever's bubbling in the cooking pot, animal manure, and the distinct tang of human waste from the chamber pot in the corner. Top notes feature mould from the damp thatch, the musty smell of stored grain, and perhaps a hint of whatever herbs you've hung to dry from the rafters. A medieval attempt at air freshening that fights a losing battle against the overwhelming sensory assault. Lighting after dark comes from the hearth fire, supplemented perhaps by rushlights, reeds dipped in animal fat, or, if you're comparatively wealthy, tallow candles. These provide illumination roughly equivalent to a modern refrigerator light, with the added features of smoke, dripping fat, and the constant threat of burning your house down. Temperature control in your medieval home offers two settings, too cold or too smoky. In winter, the area immediately around the fire might be uncomfortably hot, while just a few feet away, water freezes in its container. Heat doesn't circulate so much as create a small island of warmth in an ocean of cold. In summer, your thatched roof turns your dwelling into an efficient heat trap, creating a stifling environment that sends everyone outdoors until sleeping time. Home maintenance is a constant battle against the elements and entropy. Walls crack and need redaubing with fresh mud. Thatch rots and needs replacement. Vermin establish new colonies that must be discouraged, though never successfully eliminated. Each season brings its own challenges: spring leaks, summer insects, autumn preparations for winter, and winter's cold seeping through every possible opening. The truly remarkable thing about your medieval home isn't how primitive it is by modern standards, but how it represents the absolute pinnacle of what can be achieved with limited technology, scarce resources, and the constant pressure of mere survival. Your hovel isn't just a shelter, it's a testament to human adaptability and endurance. So as you duck through the low doorway into the smoky, cramped, aromatic space you call home, take a moment to appreciate what you've got. It may be humble, it may be crawling with more species than a modern zoo, it may trigger every allergic response possible in the human body, but it's yours. Or at least, it's yours until the next bad harvest forces you to abandon it in search of food elsewhere. Home sweet hovel. It's not much, but it's marginally better than sleeping in the fields with the wolves. Let's talk about medieval hygiene, or as modern historians call it, how did anyone survive? In our world of antibacterial soaps, daily showers, and hand sanitizer on every corner, we've developed a certain expectation of cleanliness. Medieval peasants had different standards. Not lower standards necessarily, just standards that would make modern public health officials break out in stress hives. Contrary to popular belief, Medieval people weren't completely oblivious to the concept of cleanliness. They understood that filth could be associated with disease, even if they didn't grasp the microscopic reasons why. What they lacked wasn't the desire to be clean, but rather the infrastructure, resources, and scientific understanding to achieve what we'd consider basic hygiene. Let's start with bathing. The idea that medieval people never bathed is something of a myth. They did bathe, just not with anything approaching modern frequency. A full-body bath might happen a few times a year, typically coinciding with major religious festivals. For peasants, this usually meant a dip in the local river or stream during warmer months. In winter, bathing often ceased entirely unless you were wealthy enough to have servants haul and heat water for you. The concept of the weekly bath night, with the entire family using the same bathwater in order of seniority, giving us the expression about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, was more common in later medieval and early modern periods among townspeople. For rural peasants, bathing was more opportunistic and seasonal. When bathing did occur, soap was a luxury. Medieval soap, when available, was made from animal fat mixed with lye created from wood ash, a caustic combination that cleaned effectively but was harsh on skin and expensive to produce. More commonly, peasants might use sand, clay, or just plain water for scrubbing, with various herbs added for fragrance rather than cleaning power. Between these infrequent baths, spot cleaning was the norm. Hands and face might be rinsed daily, especially before meals. A damp cloth might be used to wipe particularly dirty or smelly areas. But the kind of thorough daily cleansing we consider normal would have seemed obsessive and possibly dangerous to medieval people, who believed that excessive bathing opened the pores and made one vulnerable to illness. A belief not entirely without merit in a world without clean water or proper heating. Speaking of water, let's discuss the medieval approach to hydration. Water was widely and correctly understood to be potentially dangerous. Wells and springs could provide relatively clean water, but rivers and streams in populated areas were effectively open sewers. The solution? Drink alcohol instead. Beer, ale, and wine weren't just recreational drinks. They were safer alternatives to water because the fermentation process killed many pathogens. The alcohol content was often lower than modern equivalents, allowing for consumption throughout the day without debilitating drunkenness. Even children drank watered-down ale or small beer as their primary beverage. Dental hygiene, as we've discussed, was virtually non-existent. The closest thing to a toothbrush might be a chewed twig or a rough cloth, used occasionally rather than as part of a daily routine. The results were predictably disastrous for dental health, with tooth decay, gum disease, and chronic bad breath becoming universal experiences. Hair care followed similar patterns of infrequent attention. Washing hair was part of those occasional baths, with lye soap serving as a harsh but effective cleanser. Between washes, hair was managed through mechanical means, combing to remove the largest parasites and debris, braiding to control longer hair, and covering with hats, hoods, or veils for both practical and social reasons. These head coverings served multiple purposes. They kept hair contained and somewhat protected from the worst dirt. They absorbed sweat and oils, and they hid the inevitable results of infrequent washing. For women especially, keeping hair covered was both a practical hygiene measure and a social expectation. The medieval comb deserves special mention as one of the most important hygiene tools available. Usually made of wood, bone, or horn, combs had teeth of different widths on opposite sides. Fine teeth for removing nits, lice eggs, and wider teeth for general detangling. Combing was a social activity, with family members helping each other in the ongoing battle against head lice. which were so common as to be considered normal. Parasites weren't limited to the head. Body lice, fleas, bedbugs, and various intestinal worms were constant companions for medieval peasants. These weren't signs of unusual filth, but simply the default state of human existence before modern sanitation and medicine. Everyone had them, from peasants to kings, though the nobility might have slightly fewer thanks to more frequent changes of clothing. The medieval approach to these unwelcome guests was pragmatic. Periodic delousing through combing, occasional application of herbal repellents like lavender or pennyroyal, and simply enduring what couldn't be changed. Scratching was so common that it barely registered as noteworthy behaviour. Menstruation presented its own hygiene challenges. Without commercial products, women used rags, moss, or other absorbent natural materials that could be washed and reused or simply discarded. These methods were functional but far from ideal, making menstruation an even more difficult experience than it is today. Waste disposal, as we've touched on earlier, ranged from primitive to non-existent. In rural areas, human waste might be collected in chamber pots and then emptied onto midden heaps, essentially, household trash piles, or directly onto fields as fertilizer. In towns and cities, it often went straight into the streets or waterways. This casual approach to waste management had predictable consequences for public health. Contaminated water supplies led to frequent outbreaks of dysentery and other waterborne diseases. The close proximity of waste and living spaces created ideal conditions for flies to spread pathogens, and the general filth of urban areas in particular contributed to the rapid spread of diseases like the infamous Black Death. Speaking of disease, medieval medicine offered little help for the inevitable illnesses that resulted from these hygiene practices. Medical theory was dominated by the concept of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, which needed to be kept in balance for good health. When disease struck, treatments often involved trying to restore this balance through bloodletting, induced vomiting, or purging with laxatives, interventions that frequently weakened already vulnerable patients. Herbal remedies provided some genuine relief for certain conditions. Willow bark, containing salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, could reduce pain and fever. Honey, with its natural antibacterial properties, was effective for wound care. Various herbs could settle stomach complaints or help with sleep. But these effective treatments existed alongside completely useless or actively harmful practices, with no scientific method to distinguish between them. Wounds and injuries received primitive care at best. Cleaning might involve wine or vinegar, which coincidentally did have some antiseptic properties. Bandages were made from whatever clean or cleanish cloth was available. Serious wounds were often cauterized with hot irons to stop bleeding, creating extensive burn damage in addition to the original injury. Surgery, when unavoidable, was performed by barbers rather than physicians, who considered manual intervention beneath their dignity. Without anesthesia beyond alcohol or opium for the fortunate, and with no concept of germ theory, surgical procedures were agonizing ordeals with high mortality rates from subsequent infection. Childbirth was particularly dangerous, taking place at home with the assistance of midwives whose knowledge was based on practical experience rather than formal education. Complications that would be routine in modern hospitals were often fatal for mother, child, or both. The death of women in childbirth was so common that remarriage of widowers was a normal and expected part of social life. The most remarkable aspect of medieval health wasn't how primitive the care was, but how people adapted to living with constant discomfort, chronic conditions, and the ever-present risk of sudden, serious illness. Pain wasn't an unusual state requiring immediate remedy. It was the background noise of existence, to be endured rather than eliminated. So as you go about your medieval day, itching from parasites, aching from untreated conditions, and generally existing in a state that would warrant immediate medical intervention by modern standards, remember, this isn't exceptional. This is Tuesday in the 14th century, and compared to the plague years, you're actually having a pretty good run of health. After exploring the grim realities of medieval peasant existence, the backbreaking labour, the questionable hygiene, the architectural marvel that is your one-room hovel, you might wonder if there was any joy to be found at all. Surprisingly, medieval peasant life wasn't entirely devoid of social pleasures. In fact, community bonds were often stronger by necessity than in our modern world of digital isolation. Let's explore the vibrant, though admittedly smelly, social world of the medieval peasant. The foundation of medieval social life was the village community. Unlike today's neighbourhoods, where you might not know the people living 20 feet away, medieval villages were tight-knit units where everyone knew everyone else, their business, their secrets, their lineage, and probably the name of their favourite goat. Privacy wasn't just limited, it was practically non-existent. This had its downsides, certainly, but it also created a social safety net of sorts. The village operated as a collective in many ways. Agricultural work often required cooperation. Ploughing, harvesting, and threshing were communal activities where everyone pitched in. This wasn't due to some idyllic sense of brotherhood, but simple practicality. No single family had enough hands to bring in the harvest quickly enough before rain could ruin it. These collective work events, while exhausting, also served as social occasions. People sang work songs to maintain rhythm and boost morale. They shared news, gossip, and stories. Young people sized up potential marriage partners based on their work ethic. Medieval dating was nothing if not practical. Even in labour, there was community. The true centre of village social life, however, was the parish church. Far more than just a place of worship, the church was the community hub, the news centre, the social club, and sometimes even the marketplace. Sunday Mass wasn't optional. It was both a religious obligation and the primary social gathering of the week. After services, people would linger in the churchyard to exchange news, arrange marriages, settle disputes, and generally catch up on village affairs. Important announcements were made after Mass, ensuring everyone heard them simultaneously. In a world without newspapers, television, or internet, this was as close as you could get to a community-wide update. The church calendar structured not just religious life, but social life as well. The approximately 50 feast days and holy days throughout the year provided welcome breaks from labour and opportunities for celebration. Major festivals like Christmas, Easter, and Midsummer were elaborate affairs with specific traditions, foods, and activities. These religious festivals often incorporated pre-Christian elements, creating a blend of official church doctrine and folk traditions that the clergy reluctantly tolerated. May Day celebrations with their maypoles, harvest festivals with their corn dollies, and midwinter feasts all had pagan roots thinly veiled with Christian justifications. For a medieval peasant, these festivals offered rare opportunities for indulgence. Food and drink would be more plentiful than usual. Music, dancing, and games would provide entertainment. Special clothes might be worn if the family could afford them. For a brief time, the grinding reality of daily survival could be set aside in favour of community celebration. The village alehouse or tavern, where one existed, provided another social venue. Here, usually for the price of a drink, you could hear news from travellers, listen to a wandering minstrel if you were exceptionally lucky, or simply commiserate with your neighbours about the Lord's latest demands. Women were not excluded from these establishments, though their presence might be more common in some regions than others. Speaking of lords, your relationship with the local nobility was another aspect of social life, albeit not usually a pleasant one. The feudal system created a web of obligations and rights that bound peasants to their lords. You owed labour, a portion of your crops, and various other dues. In return, you received protection, theoretically, and the right to farm your plot of land. Interactions with the nobility were formalized and hierarchical. You didn't chat casually with the lord, you addressed him with deference, kept your eyes lowered, and probably tried to avoid his notice whenever possible. Being noticed by your social superiors was rarely a good thing in medieval society. More immediate authority figures included the village reeve, an elected position responsible for organizing labor on the lord's domain, and perhaps a bailiff representing the lord's interests. These were often fellow peasants with slightly elevated status, creating a complex social hierarchy even within the peasant class. Justice was administered through the manor court, where minor disputes and infractions were judged. More serious crimes fell under royal justice. The manor court was also where land transfers were recorded, marriages acknowledged, and inheritances settled. Attendance was mandatory when summoned, making court days another form of community gathering, though perhaps not the most enjoyable one. Family life was the most intimate social circle. Extended families often lived close together, with multiple generations supporting each other. Grandparents cared for children, while parents worked the fields. Adult siblings might farm adjacent strips of land, sharing tools and draft animals. Family bonds were economic partnerships, as much as emotional connections. Marriage was primarily an economic arrangement, rather than a romantic one. Couples needed to establish a viable household, which meant securing land, tools, and livestock. Parents were heavily involved in marriage negotiations, ensuring their children made advantageous matches that would strengthen the family's position. This isn't to say romance was entirely absent. Young people found opportunities to court during festivals, church gatherings, and communal work events. Folk songs and stories from the period are filled with romantic themes, suggesting that medieval peasants were not immune to the charms of love, even if practicality ultimately guided their choices. Once married, couples typically established their own household, though they might initially live with parents until they could afford their own dwelling. Children arrived quickly and frequently in most marriages, with large families considered desirable despite the challenges of feeding many mouths. More children meant more hands for work and better security in old age. Child rearing was a community affair. While parents had primary responsibility, neighbours, relatives, and even unrelated village elders all felt entitled to correct, guide, and discipline children. The modern concept of the nuclear family as a private unit would have seemed strange and impractical to medieval peasants. Children's play reflected the realities of adult life. Girls practiced household skills through games with miniature tools and implements. Boys mimicked agricultural work and military activities. By age 7, children were expected to contribute meaningfully to family labour, with responsibilities increasing as they grew. For entertainment beyond religious festivals, medieval peasants relied on their own resources. Storytelling was perhaps the most universal form of entertainment, with tales passed down orally through generations. These ranged from religious stories to folk tales, local legends, and heroic sagas. Music was another common pleasure. Simple instruments like pipes, drums, and stringed instruments accompanied singing and dancing at festivals. Even during ordinary evenings, singing helped pass the time while performing indoor tasks like spinning or carving. Games provided both entertainment and opportunities to develop useful skills. Wrestling, archery contests, and ball games built strength and coordination. Board games like chess, for the more educated, or Nine Men's Morris developed strategic thinking. Dice games satisfied the apparently universal human urge to gamble, despite frequent church prohibitions. Seasonal celebrations mark the turning of the agricultural year. Plough Monday in January kicked off the farming season. Rogation-tide in spring included processions around field boundaries to bless the growing crops. Lammas in August celebrated the first harvest of grain. Martinmas in November marked the slaughter of livestock that couldn't be fed through winter. Each of these occasions had specific traditions, foods, and social customs associated with them. They provided structure to the year and opportunities for community bonding that helped sustain people through the hardships of medieval life. The social world of the medieval peasant was thus surprisingly rich, despite material poverty. Community bonds were strong out of necessity. Religious observance provided structure and meaning. Family connections offered support and continuity, and occasional festivities brought moments of joy and release from daily struggles. So while you might pity the medieval peasant for their diet, their hygiene, or their housing, their social connections might actually have been more substantial than those of many modern people. In a world without social media, they were paradoxically more genuinely social than many of us today. Of course, this social connection came with constant surveillance by neighbours, limited personal freedom, and the inability to escape the reputation of your family or your own past mistakes. But at least you were never truly alone, whether you wanted to be or not. The medieval calendar wasn't marked by weekend getaways or summer vacations. Instead, it was a relentless cycle of seasonal challenges, each bringing its own unique brand of misery. Let's explore how the turning of the seasons affected your peasant life and why each had its own special way of trying to kill you. Winter, cold, dark, and hungry. Winter in medieval Europe wasn't announced by festive Starbucks cups or holiday music. It arrived with a bone-deep chill that settled into your hovel around November and didn't release its grip until March or April. Without central heating, insulation, or even proper windows, your home became little more than a windbreak with pretensions. The cold was your constant companion. Your breath fogged inside your dwelling. Water froze in buckets overnight. The dirt floor turned to frozen mud, then thawed into slippery muck on slightly warmer days, creating a delightful cycle of hazardous surfaces. Your single fire provided heat in a roughly 3-foot radius, meaning family members practically climbed over each other for the coveted spots nearest the flames. Darkness ruled your days, with sunset arriving as early as 3 or 4 p.m. in Northern Europe. You spent nearly 2/3 of your day in near-total darkness. Candles and rushlights were expensive luxuries used sparingly, if at all. Most peasant families simply adjusted their schedules to the sun, going to bed not long after sunset and rising well after dawn, assuming they could bear to leave their marginally warmer bed piles. But the true spectre haunting winter wasn't cold or darkness. It was hunger. Winter was known as the starving time, for good reason. By January or February, food stores began running dangerously low. The autumn slaughter had provided meat initially, but preserving it was difficult. Salt was expensive, smoking was imperfect, and even the best preservation methods couldn't prevent some spoilage. Your winter diet became increasingly monotonous and meagre. Dried peas, beans, and grains reconstituted into ever thinner pottage. Perhaps some wizened apples or root vegetables from storage pits. The nutritional content declined as winter progressed, leading to vitamin deficiencies that manifested as bleeding gums, slow healing wounds, and general weakness, just when you needed strength to survive the cold. Work didn't stop entirely in winter. There were still animals to tend, firewood to gather, and repairs to make. But agricultural labour slowed dramatically, giving rise to indoor activities like spinning, weaving, and tool repair. These indoor tasks were performed in poor light, leading to eye strain and accidents. Disease flourished in winter. Families crowded together in sealed-up dwellings, breathing recycled air laden with smoke and germs. The common cold, influenza, and pneumonia spread rapidly through households and villages. With immune systems weakened by poor nutrition and cold stress, even minor illnesses could become deadly. The psychological toll of winter shouldn't be underestimated. Seasonal affective disorder wasn't a recognized condition, but the depression associated with months of darkness, confinement, and scarcity was very real. Winter was a time of endurance, of counting stored food supplies with increasing anxiety, of wondering if spring would arrive before starvation. Spring, mud, labour, and empty stomachs. Spring arrived not with gentle showers and blooming flowers, but with mud. Endless, pervasive, ankle-deep mud that transformed paths into quagmires and fields into swamps. Your leather shoes, if you had them, offered minimal protection. More likely, your feet were perpetually cold, wet, and caked with mud for weeks on end. This was also the hungry spring, paradoxically, often the time of greatest food scarcity. Winter stores were depleted, and new crops weren't yet ready for harvest. The period between the last of the stored food and the first fresh greens of spring could be desperate. People resorted to foraging for anything edible, young nettles, dandelion greens, bark, and in extreme cases, even boiling leather items for sustenance. Yet spring was also when the most demanding agricultural work resumed. Fields needed ploughing and planting, all while you were at your weakest from months of inadequate nutrition. The energy expenditure required for spring fieldwork far exceeded the calories available from your meagre diet, creating a dangerous deficit. Livestock added to spring challenges. Animals that had survived winter were often as malnourished as their human caretakers. Pregnant livestock required extra attention as they gave birth, often at night and in difficult conditions. Each newborn animal represented a future resource that could mean the difference between survival and starvation, making their protection from predators and weather a critical priority. Spring flooding was a constant threat in many regions. Rivers swollen with snowmelt could destroy bridges, flood fields, and sometimes wash away entire villages. Even minor flooding could delay planting, potentially shortening the growing season and reducing harvest yields months later. Disease patterns shifted with the warming weather. The close-quarters illnesses of winter gave way to waterborne diseases as flooding contaminated wells and springs. Parasites became more active, and insects emerged to torment both humans and livestock. Summer, heat, pests, and endless toil. Summer brought relief from cold and darkness, but introduced its own special torments. Your thatched roof dwelling, so ineffective at retaining heat in winter, now trapped it mercilessly. The single room became stifling, especially with the cooking fire still necessary for food preparation. Sleeping indoors on hot summer nights was an exercise in sweaty discomfort. The work pace accelerated to an almost unbearable intensity. Crops needed constant attention, weeding, thinning, protecting from birds and animals. Hay had to be cut at precisely the right time and dried thoroughly before storage. Any delay or mistake could mean disaster months later, when winter fodder ran short. Insects reached biblical proportions. Flies swarmed around humans, animals, and food. Mosquitoes turned evenings into itchy torment. Fleas and lice multiplied exponentially in the warmth. With no effective insect repellents beyond smoke, which made the heat even more unbearable, you simply endured their constant assault. Water became a precious resource during dry spells. Wells might run low, forcing longer journeys to secure drinking water. Crops could wither in the fields after months of care. Drought years brought the spectre of famine, visible in the stunted growth of grain and vegetables long before harvest time. Summer diseases had their own patterns. Foodborne illnesses increased as meat and dairy spoiled quickly in the heat. Dysentery and other gastrointestinal diseases spread rapidly, especially in larger settlements where waste management was rudimentary at best. The summer solstice marked the longest day, but it also signaled the beginning of the most critical agricultural period. From midsummer to early autumn, the success or failure of the harvest would be determined. This created a period of intense anxiety alongside the physical demands of preparation. Autumn was the season of harvest, a time of back-breaking labour conducted with desperate urgency. The entire year's work culminated in a few critical weeks when crops had to be gathered before weather destroyed them. Every able-bodied person worked from dawn until dusk, pushing physical limits to secure food for the coming year. The weather became an obsession. A perfectly timed harvest could be ruined by unexpected rain, which could cause grain to sprout in the fields or hay to rot before proper drying. Early frosts could destroy crops still maturing. Every cloud on the horizon was watched with nervous attention. This was also slaughtering season for many animals. Livestock that couldn't be fed through winter were butchered in a frenzy of activity. Every part had to be processed quickly and properly, meat preserved, fat rendered, blood collected for sausages, intestines cleaned for casings, hides prepared for tanning. Nothing could be wasted. Food processing dominated autumn days and nights. Fruits were dried or preserved. Vegetables were stored in cool, dry places or fermented for longer keeping. Grains were carefully dried and stored, protected from moisture and rodents. The success of these preservation efforts directly determined survival chances months later. Taxes and tithes came due after harvest, adding a layer of social stress to the physical demands. The Lord's representatives and church officials arrived to claim their share, typically 10% to the church and a variable amount to the Lord, depending on local customs and agreements. These obligations had to be met before you could secure your own family's portion. Autumn was also preparation time for winter. Firewood needed cutting and stacking. Dwellings required repairs to withstand winter weather, thatching patched, walls redaubed, any structural issues addressed before they became life-threatening in freezing conditions. All this occurred while daylight hours were rapidly diminishing. The psychological aspect of autumn was complex. There was satisfaction in gathering the fruits of a year's labour, but also anxiety about whether it would be enough. Calculations were constantly revised. How many mouths to feed? How many months until spring? How much to set aside for seed? The mathematics of survival rarely provided comfortable margins. As autumn gave way to winter once more, the cycle began again. Each season presented its unique challenges. Each required different skills and strategies for survival. The medieval peasant lived in a constant state of adaptation, always preparing for the next seasonal threat while managing the current one. This seasonal rhythm shaped not just work patterns, but cultural and religious practices as well. Church festivals aligned with agricultural milestones. folk traditions developed to mark seasonal transitions. The entire social calendar reflected the agricultural cycle that dominated peasant existence. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this seasonal cycle wasn't the hardships it presented, but the resilience it fostered. Medieval peasants developed sophisticated knowledge of weather patterns, crop needs, and preservation techniques. They created community support systems to share labour at critical times. They passed down generational wisdom about which wild plants could supplement diets in hungry spring, which herbs might treat summer fevers, which signs indicated an early winter. So as you huddle near your smoky fire on a winter evening, or sweat through your single wool tunic during summer fieldwork, remember that your medieval existence isn't just about enduring each day. It's about navigating an entire year of interconnected challenges, each season setting the stage for survival in the next. And if you're very lucky and very skilled, you might just live long enough to see the cycle turn again. We've journeyed together through the mud-caked, flea-bitten, tooth-rotting reality of medieval peasant life. From the moment you woke on your straw mattress to the seasonal cycles that governed your existence, we've explored a world that's simultaneously fascinating and horrifying to our modern sensibilities. As we conclude our time travel adventure, it's worth reflecting on what we've learned about these remarkable people who populated the medieval countryside, our ancestors who somehow survived conditions that would send most of us running for the nearest urgent care centre within hours. The medieval peasant's life was undeniably harsh. Physical comfort was a foreign concept. Food was bland at best, potentially deadly at worst. Medical care was primitive when it existed at all. Work was constant and grueling. Privacy was non-existent, and death lurked around every corner, from the invisible miasma of disease to the very real threat of starvation. Yet perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of medieval peasant life wasn't the hardship itself, but the resilience it fostered. These weren't people who simply endured their circumstances. They developed sophisticated systems for survival within their technological and knowledge constraints. Consider their agricultural practices. Without modern science, peasants created complex crop rotation systems that maintained soil fertility. They selectively bred livestock for desired traits. They developed preservation techniques that, while imperfect, allowed food storage through lean seasons. All this was accomplished through careful observation and generational knowledge passed down through practical experience. Their social structures, too, reflected remarkable adaptation to harsh realities. The tight-knit village community wasn't just a cultural preference, it was a survival strategy. Cooperative labour, shared resources in emergencies, collective childcare, and mutual protection created resilience that isolated individuals could never achieve. The feudal system, for all its inequities, provided a framework of predictability in an unpredictable world. Even their religious practices served practical purposes beyond spiritual comfort. The church calendar created structure and meaning. Religious festivals provided necessary psychological relief from constant labour. Faith offered explanations for otherwise terrifying and incomprehensible events like disease and natural disasters. The medieval peasant understood something we've largely forgotten in our comfortable modern lives. Human existence is inherently precarious. They lived with constant awareness of their vulnerability to forces beyond their control, weather, disease, political upheaval, or simply bad luck. This awareness didn't lead to despair, but to pragmatic acceptance and remarkable adaptability. They found joy where they could, in the simple pleasures of a festival day, in the warmth of community bonds, in the satisfaction of a successful harvest, in the comfort of familiar traditions. They created beauty in their folk songs, their dances, their stories, and their crafts, even amid material poverty that we can scarcely imagine. So, as we return to our world of climate-controlled homes, abundant food, medical miracles, and endless entertainment options, perhaps we should carry back something more valuable than relief at escaping their hardships. Perhaps we should bring back appreciation for their resilience, their practical wisdom, and their understanding of what truly matters for human survival and meaning. The medieval peasant wouldn't last a day in our world of technological complexity and social isolation. But I wonder sometimes if we would fare any better in theirs, if we've lost something essential in our pursuit of comfort and convenience. Next time you flush a toilet, switch on a light, or open a refrigerator full of food from around the world, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors. Their lives may have been nasty, brutish, and short, but they laid the foundation for everything we take for granted. Their fields became our cities. Their folk remedies evolved into our pharmaceuticals. Their oral traditions developed into our literature. And most importantly, their DNA, tested and strengthened through unimaginable hardship, flows in our veins, a living testament to human endurance against all odds. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight on your memory foam mattress, beneath your hypoallergenic duvet, in your temperature-regulated bedroom, remember, you're descended from people who survived the medieval world, and that might be the most impressive accomplishment in your entire family tree. Thank you for joining me on this journey through medieval peasant life. If you enjoyed this historical exploration, please consider subscribing for more glimpses into the past, where we can appreciate the strange, difficult, and fascinating lives of those who came before us, all from the comfortable distance of centuries. Until next time, be grateful for antibiotics, indoor plumbing, and the remarkable luxury of boredom. Your medieval ancestors certainly would be.